All right, and we need a big round of applause for our special guest. He actually has already mentioned an NFT on BSV, and he is not just an actor from Entourage and other fame, and of course one of my favorite movies, The Devil Wears Prada, but also a regional goodwill ambassador for North America for the UN Environment Program and a strong environmental activist. Please give it up for Adrian Grenier.
Hey guys. Sorry I'm late.
We've got a big group here, so we'll get right into questions. Thanks for the intro, Jimmy. Adrian, maybe we can begin with you. Maybe not everybody is aware of some of the investments you've made in sustainable businesses, so maybe you could begin by sharing a little bit of what you've invested in and maybe even share a little bit with the farm in Texas.
Yeah, so I have an impact fund called DuContra, and we've been investing over the years in sustainable businesses and now looking at 4 categories. One for the betterment of humans, so the up-leveling of the individual, communitas, how we can invest in communities, future of finance, so very much into blockchain technology, and then consumer goods. And one company in particular out of New York is called Blue Land, and they do consumer cleaning products without plastic. So instead of shipping around a bunch of plastic with a bunch of water, they just ship you the compressed material that you add water to, and then you have cleaning products in your home.
Okay. Would you like to share anything about the farm in Texas?
The farm in Texas, yes. Well, I grew up in New York. I was born in New Mexico, but I grew up here since a very small child. Was in Brooklyn for 20 years, but now I live in Texas. I got a ranch, and I'm taking environmentalism to the very personal and the very hyper-local. So creating a little community, nature-based, heart-centered community.
Excellent. Dhirendra, maybe we'll turn to you and picking up on the consumer angle. You've done a little bit of research into consumer behavior and their preferences when it comes to energy options. Maybe you could share a little bit about that research.
Yeah, so, work with a lot of thought leaders in the energy space. And we naturally thought that, we went and surveyed a lot of people and from looking at a consumer behavior perspective. And when we went and interviewed people, we thought, we asked them, if we put solar panels on your house, what would you think about us implementing those solar panels? We'll take care of everything. Or we put a sign in front of your house that showed that, no, this person is awesome, believes in green and community. What would you do? And we naturally thought that, we are putting the solar panels. They'll jump on it. Actually, they said, don't put the solar panels. Put the sign on the front yard that makes my community feel that, look, I am green, I'm environmentally conscious. But I said, we are taking care of the solar panels. They said, that makes my house look ugly. So forget the solar panel, put that sign on. And I said, but you drive, can I mention the car? You drive a Tesla, don't you already naturally signal? They said, when you talked about the lawn sign that please recognize that I care about the environment, that Tesla is that lawn sign. We are driving around, and why this is so fundamentally important is if we are really, really going to think about a mindset change around energy consumption, and environment, it needs a fundamental change, a mindset change in our community. And so that deeper conversation, I'm not going to repeat what Greta said, so their deeper conversation is needed, and this is a forum that's actually doing that, and that's quite exciting.
Maybe picking up a bit on that, Hash, in terms of signaling, of course, corporates are now having to report more on ESG, and so I'm just wondering from your standpoint, are you getting those types of questions from your clients, and how are you advising them?
Well, absolutely, and in fact, as I mentioned before, our firm serves the mid-market. And so the mid-market's where the action's happening, right? And they're thinking ahead. And if they're going public, They not only want their financial health to be sound, the balance sheet, the income statement, but they also want to be able to provide that data sheet on what they're doing for diversity, for the social, for the governance, basically the ESG angle. And this is even coming down to, again, I'm based out of Ottawa, Canada, and that's the capital. And Ottawa has a lot of government departments and crown corporations. They are beginning to focus on how they can be more aligned to the ESG principles.
Certainly, and picking up on that, Lars, maybe we can move to you, because there's certainly a role for miners to play in helping improve the network efficiency as people begin adopting at the enterprise level blockchain solutions and building things that have been built on BSV. So sort of what role can miners play in sort of improving that efficiency of the network?
Yeah. I think miners can play different roles in this. I mean, one of the things, of course, is that our hashing fleet, the actually mining units, to keep them up to date, to make sure you have the newest models, the latest, the best performing models, in order to get the most hash power out of the energy that you consume. And I think miners should be very investigative on new technologies, like, for instance, immersion cooling, where you can enhance your performance again. There are different other methods that could, like airflow through your mining farm, through the individual machines. And I think also that maybe it is about time that the manufacturers of mining equipment, that they start looking a bit more into how to come up with more efficient units.
Excellent. Dave, maybe we'll turn to you, and if you could tell us a little bit about Compute North and how you approach the challenge of energy consumption.
Yeah, it's great to be here. So for those of you not familiar with Compute North, we develop and operate large-scale infrastructure for miners. So our specialty has really been doing it at unprecedented scale and at low cost. And increasingly, ESG is really becoming a really key part of this story. I think it's really starting to shift from what was, several years ago, kind of a zero-sum game. How do I get my energy more cheaply? And the other side is going to sell it at less. It's now becoming much more of a strategic element where how do we work together to drive down those costs and work together? And things like demand response programs, some of the ability to bring the load anywhere, opens up some really interesting opportunities. And that's kind of the market that we play in and specialize.
Okay, perfect. Steve, I know that you sit on a number of different roles and wear a lot of hats. So maybe I can ask you about what are options to repurpose the heat created from mining rigs, and can they be channeled to more productive uses?
Well, yeah, Bitcoin miners have a waste product, which is heat. And people mining operations spend an awful lot of money trying to deal with that waste product. And one of the common ways of doing it, of course, is to add a cooling system to a mining operation. But I think a thing that's probably not commonly known about most electrical appliances is that they are all 100% efficient in turning the energy that they're burning, whether it's your TV, your fridge, anything else, into heat. They're exactly as efficient as an electric element heater. So if you have a use case for an electric element heater, then you've got a use case for a miner. And the biggest problem that's probably stopped people from making use of this in the past is that miners are also really noisy because they are using the air cooling. But liquid cooling really, changes the game there. So, miners, anywhere where you're making use of electric element heaters as opposed to heat pumps, it's probably about 35% of the heating market in Europe is actually still using electric element heaters. You can replace that with a Bitcoin miner, earn revenue at the same time as you're burning the power that you actually were going to be burning anyway. That's just one potential application for it. But it's I wouldn't call it high-grade heat that's coming off, but it's a sort of a low to medium-grade heat, which has lots of potential applications, not just for home heating, but commercial and industrial operations as well.
Maybe sticking with you then in a bit about how Bitcoin is built on economic incentives. And do you think that there's a role here for Bitcoin to play in incentivizing better behavior to work towards climate action?
Absolutely. Part of the incentive is the political climate around this, but also, miners are obviously very well incentivized to make use of renewable energy because there's no cheaper source of energy than the stuff that comes out of the sky for free. But miners really have the opportunity to change the dynamics of the entire energy industry, because the really unique thing about a mining operation is when you think about a big compute data center, it needs three things. It needs a source of power, it needs a source of cooling, because you're turning a lot of that power into heat, and it needs really fast internet connections. But what mining operations don't need is the internet connection, and that means that a mining operation is completely geographically unbounded. It can operate at any location in the world, which means it can tap into energy sources that otherwise would be unusable. But it can also tap into energy sources, at different times of the day when there's excess supply on a network, which is what happens when you have a lot of renewable resources. That supply can be unpredictable. Miners can sit there and soak up this excess energy, and that changes the economics of any energy infrastructure project. It makes things economic that otherwise might not have been, because it's just that extra nudge in revenue to help get them over the line.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Maybe, Dhirendra, turning to you you've looked at energy consumption and using blockchain to help manage that, and specifically on microgrids. Maybe you could share a bit more about that.
So if you look at applications of blockchain or crypto, the overall philosophy is that it was supposed to move power to a distributed environment rather than focused on a handful of people. So we looked at, from a Canadian perspective, we looked at remote communities, indigenous communities. And now what we're doing is working with the indigenous communities or communities in Africa to say, build out your solar system, build out your wind, build out your hydro, and we are going to create a blockchain network where you can actually trade, buy credits, trade within your community, and control your own environment and be quite independent. So we've prototyped that, and we are actually demonstrating. So now we're able to go to remote areas and feel that we give the power back to the community, back to the people, and experiment with, give them an ability to really rise of the whole movement of rise of the rest. And that's what it's doing, is now we're taking blockchain implementation, moving it further and further to the edges, giving them access to energy and power where most people did not feel that was needed, and giving them the control of how that whole infrastructure is managed. And that's what we're working on right now. And we've prototyped it, and we're showing it and demoing it. It's quite exciting.
That is very exciting. And Adrian, that picks up on something that you've talked about, which is the role that Bitcoin can play in empowering people. So picking up on what Dhirendra said, do you see a connection between empowered people and the success of efforts to have more sustainable businesses and economies?
Absolutely. I mean, crypto is essentially decentralized. So it's like it's not only a pure free market, but it's also a free market of ideas and innovation. So you have more people working on these types of problems. So then you're going to have, an increase in not only productivity but also efficiency. So absolutely believe that because there's so much access to so many people, we can actually improve upon the problem at a much quicker rate.
Very interesting. Lars, so maybe moving a little bit just to you, and a very specific question that, there's been recent news around some of the miners partnering with nuclear power plants. I'm just wondering sort of what your view on that is as a way of reducing emissions, and then maybe just a more general comment. As a miner at TAAL, what is your approach to accessing renewable energy?
The relationship that you're mentioning with the nuclear power, it is of course very, very tempting to get clean energy for your machines, possibly also cheap energy. The question is a little bit also from a morality standpoint, how do you want future generations to deal with your clean energy of today? Right? So it is something we are evaluating different hosting providers, mining sites all the time. Renewable energy is clearly one of the factors of several factors, but one of the factors that we use when we evaluate these different sites. We personally at TAAL, we haven't come across any nuclear power energy yet on the sites that we're evaluating, but it's clearly something that will go into the equation when we evaluate them. But renewable energy is high on the agenda for sure at TAAL.
And you're based in Canada, so do you have access to a lot of hydropower?
Yes.
Or,
Yes. Yes.
Excellent. Dave, based on the business you run, how do you respond to clients that are concerned about energy consumption, emissions, and environmental impact?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's becoming a bigger and bigger part of the narrative. And I think one of the things that I've learned through just the experience with the energy industry is that not all green is created equal. There's a lot of various shades. I think even the definition of that isn't quite clear. And I think we're starting to make our way to some more clarity. You know, on one side of the equation, there's things like renewable energy credits, which if you really start pulling things back, it's pretty interesting in the way some of those markets and some of the voluntary components work. There's carbon offsets. There's, you know, even doing things like tax equity, which actually helps facilitate new builds. And then there's all the way where you need to run exactly on the electron, 100% green power, like behind the meter. And we have clients that are all over the board. We still have some that don't care. But I'll say, I think it's becoming less and less, particularly the publicly traded companies where ESG is a very important part of their narrative, I think are moving further to the right. And I think we'll see that continue to move over the course of the next several years.
Maybe that's a good transition to Hash, sort of talking about maybe some of the key risks that the Bitcoin network faces in terms of environmental impacts, and how do we think we can best manage those as a community?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think one of the most important things is some of the, let's say, misunderstanding and misconception of what's happening. I think Steve made an excellent point. You know, there's an alignment of a mining firm wanting to get the cheapest power available. And that's going to take that mining firm to find, hey, where can I find that power? And as an example, we have a client in Ottawa, well, it's actually Gatineau, that they're an energy company. And if you know the way the seasons work, often in the spring runoff, all their dams are producing all this energy, and they had to burn it. They had to actually run their pumps backwards just to use that energy up. What a great source of energy. So I think this comes down to making sure you're doing the right things innately, reporting on them, having the systems and the controls in place that you feel confident that there's no surprises, and then educating your consumers and the public.
Okay. Perfect. Steve, maybe just a bit of a change for you, but why isn't proof of stake the solution that some claim in terms of being more efficient for energy? And what does proof of work offer that proof of stake doesn't?
So I guess let me begin by highlighting what the difference is between the two. You know, proof of work is essentially a vote by hashing power, by not just capital investment, but operational expenditure. Proof of stake requires capital investment to purchase the stake, but essentially your proportion of that stake represents your kind of voting power within a network. And the really key difference between those two is that in proof of stake, I didn't mention operational expenditure. There is no OPEX. So once you've made your initial investment, you just keep on, or you've got your votes, and you keep on generating revenue. There's actually no incentive for you to improve your ability to validate transactions on a network. Because you'll get paid, you know, regardless. And there's also no risk to you, so there's no sort of competitive drive for you to, you know, become better and faster at processing transactions than the other miners that you're busy competing with. So proof of work is actually a kind of essential feature of Bitcoin blockchain because it underlies the economic incentive model that actually makes Bitcoin work and makes Bitcoin scale. You know, if you think about two proof of stake validators that merge together, well, you combine this guy's stake and this guy's stake together, they have a larger stake. But now they can switch one of their servers off, their validating servers, and halve their operational costs. You can't do that with proof of work. So it keeps the industry competitive, and that's essentially what drives Bitcoin to be able to eventually become a global infrastructure provider.
You touched on something interesting there around the scale, so maybe I can open up to the group to talk about, because scale is obviously very important, especially when we talk about going to enterprise and be able to handle that. But also, Hash, you covered it in terms of driving down the energy consumption per transaction. So open up to the group to talk about sort of that utility angle of what scale will bring. So Steve or anybody else to talk about that.
Maybe I'll kick it off if you guys are good. At the end of the day, I believe this is about data. This is about data and value tied to that data. Whichever solution allows you to move more data is in the end going to win out. And I think, things like ESG, effective reporting, it's all about data. Reporting sits on top of data.
Yeah, I'd also say, the first widget is always the most expensive, and this is still a new technology that's improving every day and getting better, and the competition will help to make it even better more quickly. But I think people that want to dismiss crypto as being unsustainable don't fully understand the complexity of the opportunity that crypto has for society across the board. It's not just about mining efficiency, it's also about how it's going to improve every industry.
Mm-hmm. And actually, Dhirendra, you had done, we had this conversation before we came out here in terms of why do you think the media focuses on energy consumption of Bitcoin, but they seem to give a pass to other industries? We even had a bit of a chat about how, tumble dryers use, I think it's 1.6 times more energy than the Bitcoin network, but people talk about Bitcoin, but they don't talk about, dryers. So just curious, to share some of your thoughts on that.
Because they want to get clicks. Crypto's cool.
It's an awesome question. Reality is, when you go and speak to public and you tell them, blockchain and crypto, and their eyes start glazing over. And so they've not, building on that conversation, they haven't spent the time and energy to really understand the technology as it stands. And as a result, it becomes an easy target. So how do you create this awareness? So there are two elements I think there's a huge opportunity for us to look at. One is how do you, if it's all about data, if the power is in the data, how do you begin to take that data to build out and quantify what is happening in the industry? So that goes with any, if you look at the maturity of any industry, there's a lot of data. Capture that data, analyze that data, benchmark that data compared to other industry sources. Now you have a conversation that is taking place at a level playing field. Because that hasn't happened, guess what's happening? You're an easy target for people to poke at. So firstly, you need to measure, quantify, and begin. Then you need to have the social engagement. So it's not about how do I have this cool data set, I've published this paper. How do you then get the awareness in the community that this means interesting results and why this is happening? So as a result, there was no way to rebut some of those conversations that took place because some of that work hasn't happened yet. You know what? Even though the energy industry has been around for a very long time, when you talk about nanogrids, microgrids, and smart grids, they're just figuring it out themselves right now. So when you talk about different miners, when you talk about the different scale, right now, even our electric power utilities are still trying to quantify this much is nuclear energy, this is coal. So they're still figuring it out, which have been around for such a long time. So we, as a thought leader in crypto and blockchain that is transparent and that is trust in the system, we need to be thought leaders and begin to produce results and engage the community in a holistic manner rather than, data is important, but the engagement at a broader set where you begin to take that data and begin to influence people's perception, mindset with their heart and soul that, yes, I believe this is happening. So data is one, logic, but the emotion needs to be built in and people need to believe and buy it. And crypto and blockchain does that.
I mean,
And correct me if I'm wrong, someone, but aren't we still minting pennies at a great loss? So let's look at efficiency across our current economic system as well.
People understand pennies, though, right? To your point, I say that too. It's a lazy argument. For the bulk of the folks that come and make the energy argument, they simply don't understand. They don't understand the technology, where it's going to go, the other benefits it provides at a larger scale. And I have the same issue with Facebook. It uses up a lot of energy, and I think it's a complete waste of time. You know, I mean, look at the Wall Street Journal, investigation the last 2 weeks of the damage it causes. But fortunately, markets make these decisions and not individual policymakers, which is a good thing.
But this type of conversation helps that, right? We've got the right type of people with the right mindset engaging an audience. But one thing, if I can be, the audience are already an advocate of what this industry is all about. How do you reach the hearts and souls of a broader set of community that gets it? And that is influence, and that is critical.
Well, exactly, and Dave, you sort of touched on something which I think is the utility, right? Is many people still don't understand what the technology can really do, so they're evaluating purely financial speculation as it's covered in, say, the Wall Street Journal. So I just open up to the group what they think about that, of the best ways to get that discussion around utility out to people so that they don't think of it just in terms of the coin price that they see reported. So I'd love to open that up to the group to talk about ways to get the utility argument out there to people.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the issue. The wider world sees Bitcoin burning a whole lot of energy, and they don't understand why. What's the benefit? What's the utility? So the answer to that question, how do we explain it? Well, that's not the easiest question to answer. There's a lot of different ways that we could try, and we'll probably try a bunch of them, and eventually find the right set that work. But that is key. There are actually huge benefits to using Bitcoin, and that is what justifies the energy cost. No one argues that we shouldn't burn energy to run a hospital, because it's obvious what the benefit of that is, and it's obvious what would happen if you tried to run a hospital without energy input. So Bitcoin cannot. Bitcoin provides utility in ways that we haven't even imagined just yet. But it can also be the base layer for actually helping us understand energy markets properly themselves. Miners could easily lead the way here by burning records into the blockchain for every block they mine to show auditability and accountability in terms of where their energy sources are coming from, and they could blaze a trail that would then get adopted by other industries. But the utility question: how do you explain the utility of Bitcoin? Firstly, it's got to be able to scale, so that people can actually use that utility in a way that's meaningful to society. And secondly, the use cases need to be identified and put in front of people in a way that's easy for them to see the benefit and start using.
I was wondering if anyone else had any thoughts on that utility thing, and are sort of areas that they think would really resonate with the broader public, or certainly the mainstream media, in terms of trying to explain this so that comparison is a more fair comparison.
I feel the best context is, I always say this to my staff, investors, and partners, is how early we are still. And I always use the context, it's 1994. And what I mean by that was a period of time when I first got in the industry. It was an internet service provider. That was my first business. And we were doing dial-up, email, that whole world. And it was weird. It was esoteric. It was hard to use. It was challenging. A lot of people asked you questions, and no one knew what an email address was. But what happened very quickly is the innovation, the adoption, all those things were occurring. If you look at this industry and just this ecosystem, it's exactly what's happening. I mean, this conference is a great example of just the magnitudes of investment, the people, the technologies, and the real-world problems that are getting solved. And it's not always perfect out of the gate. It always takes some time, and that's what excites me, and that's what makes this whole sphere a lot of fun.
Hash, I saw you nodding along. Do you have something to add?
I was just thinking that, you look at the the people up on stage and the diversity of experiences, backgrounds, I think that's the key. The ecosystem that is part of Bitcoin, it is when that ecosystem starts to produce, applications, uses. In fact, what success is going to be, or what success is going to look like, is no one's going to know that it's actually a blockchain solution that is helping them to get from their apartment to a hospital. I think, but it's going to need those, perspectives of a whole bunch of different professionals and different stakeholders.
Adrian, just wondering, because as a high-profile advocate, I'm sure you get lots of questions from mainstream press when you're out there talking about it. So just curious your thoughts.
Well, so in creating community, we have an interest in keeping our value local, like being able to exchange. There's a lot of, at least in my community, a lot of bartering. It's like, I'll do something for you, you do something for me, and then we don't have to deal with contracts or checks or anything like that, or money. But if you had a crypto technology that could actually track the exchange of goods and services within the community and keep the value very hyper-local, there's a lot less loss. I mean, when you put your money in the centralized banking system, you're losing a lot of money, especially with inflation and the printing of money. Suddenly, they're stealing your literal value. But when you have a hyper-local currency, you know what's being shared, and you keep it actually serving your community.
So, Steve, just wondering on that, because data is core at what we do at nChain. So, just curious on that, because that's a big challenge that we have, right? Is explaining that value of what data integrity is. So, I'm just wondering, do you think that plays a role in terms of helping address this? Again, it would be something that would be almost plumbing, like behind the scenes. And do you think it helps to explain it, or?
I think it can, because the core message behind Bitcoin for me is actually a pretty compelling message. If you boil it down, what Bitcoin really does is it makes it easier to be honest than to be dishonest. And in that way, it actually is a tool to make the world a much more pleasant place to live in. Because who would argue that business with integrity is better than is not better than business with corruption. So it's not an easy case to make, I suppose, because it does require a fairly sort of deep understanding of how Bitcoin works. But if you can get that message across, and you're a marketing guy, I think you actually know how to get messages across a lot better than I do. But that is a great message. And if that's what we're purchasing with the expenditure of energy, a more honest world and a world with more integrity, that's something that someone like you could sell.
Yeah, I'm curious, Lars, do you get that question as a miner from your investors, for instance?
I think it's rather important to in this, the public discussion that's going on and the energy consumption, et cetera, and this Bitcoin, everything, and I see that from my circle of friends and family, et cetera, that, you're not talking about the Elon Musk Bitcoin. It's actually another Bitcoin. And I think that there is some missionary work to be carried out in the public, that there's actually different Bitcoins, and it is not this speculative Elon Musk, Tesla, whatever Bitcoin that we are talking about that provides this value. And I think it's quite important to bring it out, that this value that the BSV chain creates.
Again, back to the scaling, correct?
Exactly.
Dhirendra, I saw you nod along, so it seems like you have something to say.
Well, and I think that's the perception. And I think let's go, if we look forward, people, as the awareness is there, they will begin to understand the nuances of their decision making. So that becomes an important play in terms of its trust. I believe in it, and there is transparency. This entire ecosystem is built on transparency and trust, and these are the elements that I need to buy my, this service that I'm going to acquire is built on this, and it aligns with my personal values. So that it will come to that point, and we need to be ready for that, because as any technology emerges and matures, that type of conversation needs to happen, and those nuances need to be played out so that people can digest it and actually result in decision making.
I guess, Steve, maybe just back, because I think that's an interesting point around it at the individual level, but then, so say nChain or even TAAL looking at enterprise level adoption. Do enterprise care about it in the same way, or is one of the ways to get this through is to get enterprise adopting it for the utility argument, and then other people begin seeing that it's in their daily life and they adopt it that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the best ways for Bitcoin to be adopted is for people to adopt it without realizing that they're using Bitcoin. It's a utility, and Craig's fond of calling it plumbing. No one sees the pipes in the cities that keep cities basically operating, but they're there, and that's kind of where Bitcoin probably should be in terms of the awareness of the general consumer. Yeah, and how do you deliver that kind of plumbing type utility? Well, it's enterprises that do that. So yeah, they already have large customer bases, established relationships, etc., and they're just looking for ways to solve another problem for their customers, because their customers are going to be happy to pay a little bit more for that. So they are the sales and marketing team, I suppose, of Bitcoin. They'll do the job for us once they understand what value and utility that Bitcoin can enable them to deliver to their customers. Yeah.
Dave, I'd like to go back to something you said about, you started way back in the day in terms of being an internet provider back in the 90s. What's the similarities you see or the differences you see in terms of the broader understanding of what the technology is going to be able to do, right? Because clearly in the early 90s, not everybody saw the same thing about the internet as a few people did.
Yeah, I mean, I guess probably overall it's just this, it's a standard, right? It's certainly coming out. It's the largest, permissionless distributed database in the world. It solves a lot of problems, scalability and some of these challenges. I think, we're currently working through those. They're all things that are going to get solved. And so when you start to look at that trajectory, like I also, with the proof of work and the proof of stake argument, we have 13 years of proof of work experience now. We know it works. We know it hasn't been breached. We know we got, foresight into where that's going to go. Some of the other technologies, well, I think innovation is great. I think it's going to take a while for that to really play out. And I also think that the technology's got to be about 10 times better before it ever displaces a standard. And I think we have a standard right now. And that's why we're bullish on it. We think it's going to continue to, be a cornerstone. And I think it's going to be here a long time. I mean, one thing, IPv4 was in the late 60s, which is the primary, IP protocol we operate on today. Most people don't know there's a new protocol that came out in 1998. I think less than 4% of all internet nodes run that natively today, because it's incremental improvements, but it's not a wholesale change. And there was a lot of solutions that allowed IP4 to get to where it is today, and I think we'll see the same trajectory.
So, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just can I make another utility case?
Yeah.
I think it's going to really transform media in my business, like filmmaking, communication. Is going to bring, is going to empower artists to have exchange directly with consumers, get commercialization out of that relationship, unless it's chosen. But yeah, I mean, it's just even just social media networks to be able to, I mean, look at what's happening with Facebook. I mean, they're selling our data for profit, and we don't see any of that money, right? So I like to see social media networks that allow both users and content creators have a more autonomous exchange of value.
I think that raises a good point, though, for the group maybe to mull about, and if anyone has a thought on it, which is there are some large incumbents who actually stand to lose part of their business around the adoption of this. So just curious to open that thought up to the group. Because I think that is, when we look at the mainstream media coverage of it, you can certainly see that there's lots of vested interest in terms of what that coverage would look like, correct?
Yeah. Bye. I mean, even in filmmaking, I think it would be so great if everybody involved in the filmmaking process, from the actor to the producer to the key grip or craft services, if everybody was incentivized to do the best job for the production, and they all have a piece of success, and it can be tracked and transparent, I think it just make more people have access to the world's wealth, and that's really the most democratic thing you could do for people in the working world.
Maybe that's a good word, because we're running up with about 10 minutes left, so I wanted to open up for that final question that I talked to you guys about, which was more around where do you see the BSV community can really make a difference, either in tackling energy efficiency, so as you said, maybe hardware providers need to do more, or some of the entrepreneurs and developers who are in the audience who are thinking about what they can do, whether it's ways to help everybody share in the economic value created by an enterprise, or to just open up to the group maybe one at a time to share where they think that the real case can be made for the BSV community to make a difference here. So open up, maybe start with you, Dhirendra.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, there's a huge opportunity with the peer-to-peer trading, going to the community, helping them get empowered. So first thought was we were experimenting. We were just trying to see what we could do with crypto. Why suddenly the community wanted us to deploy and start using some of the infrastructure? They simply said, because it gives the power back to us, gives the power back to our community, gives us control, gives us respect and integrity that we need to have something like this, that we can use, we can celebrate, we can feel that we are moving our community out of some of those things. So from moving that forward, we see similar or that morphing of that technology and used in different sort of ways. And right now, we're talking about, energy and environment. The other element that we haven't talked about is the so-called the scamminess of the industry, right? So it's an important conversation because it's holistic. We need to have that holistic conversation. So we see a point where right now there's looking at fraud and risk and fines and compliance. There needs to be a deeper analysis that it will come down to where how do we ensure there is that trust, transparency in the system, that people are naturally gravitating to applications, naturally doing this, and they feel that the trust is gone into the system, and we believe in the infrastructure, we believe in the conversation that's happened. The piping is there, but we believe that the new applications that have come up, that are being drawn, and our companies like Grey Wolf, while we're focused on one element, we want to get entrenched in providing deeper value from the community, learn from the community, and grow and evolve at the same time. So it's going to be a tough battle, because when you talk about the internet, where it's gone, when the initial invention was what's happening here, and then it suddenly, applications exploded on the internet, right? When suddenly people got used to it. Mm-hmm. Then the same thing with the computing. All of these things, we as a community have gone through the transformation and have come out stronger at the end. And guess what? That same thing will happen here. As the application grows, people get more and more excited, they get used to the applications, and new values are going to be created on crypto and blockchain.
Steve, do you want to take that one again back on sort of what the community can do to really push it forward?
Look, there's 100 different answers to that question, and so I'm just going to have to pick one. And I might try to draw a comparison between the energy grid itself and Bitcoin. And the energy grid that we're using and relying on now is actually becoming more and more peer-to-peer over time. People are generating power on their rooftops. And they're installing batteries at home so that they can store excess power during the day to make use of at night, etc. And that means that if you don't have a solar set up on your roof and you're consuming power, you might be actually consuming power that's coming from your neighbor. And so, we're already seeing this distributed power grid start to emerge. And I think that Bitcoin could actually play, a huge role in that. Imagine smart devices that can negotiate over the internet for the next 2 hours worth of power with a device that's, in the local area. That's actually really helpful for power grids because the more kind of localized usage that you can get It's complicated, but it helps to improve the stability of power grids. They're going through challenges right now dealing with this this new degree of distribution. So, that's just one small example. There's hundreds of ways, but Bitcoin could really turn a peer-to-peer power grid into something that is truly peer-to-peer in an economic sense as well as in the physics sense.
Yeah. That's very exciting because we're actually using the smart contract in our application right now. That's awesome. That's a great thing.
I'll go back to something I think we alluded to earlier, and it's about services delivered through this ecosystem. And the only thing maybe to add is the more we can design in considerations for how do you audit, how do you provide certification, how that's actually built into the environment, where the protocol maybe even allows you to trace back where the energy came from, what the equipment was that drove it, the efficiency. I mean, that was one of the challenges we had in the study we were doing. The more effective it's going to be.
Lars?
Yeah, I think also the traceability and then the transparency, that is the real strength of the BSV network. And I think that the real adaptation comes when the users, the society, the people, they don't even know that they're using it.
Agreed.
That's when we have the full adaptation.
I come from the infrastructure world, so I certainly have a view on it from that standpoint. Two things jump out at me is, one, I think the partnerships, which is starting to come to fruition with some of the largest energy firms in the world, as they start to get behind this, I think it changes the credibility aspect. And you had alluded earlier about kind of the squirminess of the industry. We've seen a Darwinism event where a lot of the bad actors are starting to get out of the space. So with those two combinations, I think that's phenomenal for the community, for the ecosystem. I think it pushes us forward. The other thing, Lars, you can attest to this, on the hardware side, things are like we talked about the second inning before, it's like the first inning, maybe the first half of the first inning in regards to enterprise control, scale, things that like on the HPC and data center side that we've had tools and techniques and even like standardized form factors, immersion cooling, like seeing those progress their ways into the mining equipment allows us to run them more efficiently, longer lifespan, and not increase e-waste, which I think is going to be kind of the second follow-up to energy use, is what happens to all this equipment and this gear when it's no longer used. We see a world where it can go to a wind farm that's running at negative rates in the middle of the night and only run for 8 hours a day. And that's a great use and kind of worldwide types of components for that, a literal farm system. But some things need to happen yet for that to be a reality.
I think the e-waste one is just beginning to be part of the discussion, and certainly probably at the next CoinGeek we'll probably need a panel to discuss it.
Hold you to that.
Yeah,
so.
Adrian, right. as we're wrapping up in the final couple of minutes, maybe you can share what you think sort of a community of either developers, entrepreneurs, or others can do to help push this forward and help with it, sort of that energy angle of it.
Yeah, I'm afraid to say I'm no expert. Early adopter maybe, but I just feel lucky to be on the stage with such brilliant minds. These guys are innovating, they're creating, and I'm crypto curious, and I'm at the edge of my seat waiting for the utilities to come about so that I can use them in my everyday life. I'm just basically the everyman consumer here, and so I leave it up to them to create what's next.
And on that, maybe we'll finish. So thank you very much, guys. This has been a really good discussion.
Thank you.